Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the actual science behind why you literally cannot turn your brain off, and we'll be revealing some evidence-based strategies to finally help you find a little mental quiet. If you've ever spent, say, 40 minutes drafting a 2-sentence text message, or found yourself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. analyzing a completely random conversation from 3 years ago, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to break down exactly what your brain is doing, why it's doing it, and most importantly, how you can finally take the steering wheel back.
Now, because overthinking is inherently chaotic, this explainer is going to be the exact opposite. Here is our structured roadmap out of the mental weeds. First, the evolutionary mismatch. Then, inside the overthinking brain, followed by paralysis and personality, strategies for a calmer mind, and finally, embracing imperfect decisions.
All right, Section 1, the evolutionary mismatch. Let's dive right in and explore why your constant worrying isn't actually a personal failure, but more of a biological glitch. Think about a giraffe for a second. It lives in an immediate return environment. If it's hungry, it eats a leaf. Storm rolls in, it finds shelter. Sees a lion, it runs. Its actions instantly and permanently solve its problems, and the stress immediately drops. Now, contrast that with us. Humans live in a delay return environment. The stuff we agonize over, saving for retirement, navigating a career change, building long-term relationships, these are all problems delayed into an incredibly uncertain future. We're essentially walking around with ancient Paleolithic hardware that is constantly short-circuiting, all because it's trying to solve the complex, delayed uncertainties of the modern world using stress responses that were meant for dodging lions.
Grounding this in our clinical source material, psychology breaks this exhausting mental tax down into two distinct categories: rumination over the past and worry about the future. Rumination is when you replay past mistakes in slightly different mental costumes, kind of hoping for a different outcome. And worry, that's when you project catastrophic uncertainty into the future. Both are forms of what is scientifically called perseverative cognition. You aren't actually solving anything. Your brain is just frantically pacing back and forth across the timeline.
Moving right along to Section 2, inside the overthinking brain. Let's see how this evolutionary mismatch actually manifests physically inside your head.
The absolute main culprit here is the default mode network, or the DMN. This is a whole constellation of brain regions that fires up the exact moment you stop focusing on an external task. But here is the neurological catch. Your DMN acts like a seesaw with your frontoparietal network, which is basically your brain's attention control center. When the DMN becomes hyperactive during overthinking, it literally overpowers your brain's ability to focus on the present moment. Your attention control system gets hijacked, completely trapping you in this exhausting loop of internal chatter that you physically struggle to snap out of.
Let's try a classic experiment by psychologist Daniel Wegner to show why it's so incredibly hard to break out of this loop. Right now, whatever you do, absolutely do not think about a white bear. Seriously, clear your mind, and under no circumstances should you picture a white bear. You totally just pictured a white bear, didn't you? This is what we call the suppression trap. Telling yourself to just stop worrying literally creates a neurological debt. When we try to force our brains to suppress a thought, we are neurologically setting ourselves up for a massive rebound. The second your guard drops, the anxiety in those unwanted thoughts just flood back in with a vengeance. Trying to forcibly silence the DMN only makes it yell louder.
As researcher Susan Nolan-Huxima so brilliantly put it, overthinking doesn't actually process your problems, it just preserves negative emotions, soaking your body in cortisol and keeping your brain on high alert. You might feel like you're actively problem-solving, but in reality, you're just preserving your distress like a fossil trapped in amber. And this chronic cortisol drip spikes your blood pressure, wrecks your sleep, and just physically exhausts your body.
All right, Section 3, paralysis and personality. Now that we understand the hardware, let's look at how overthinking uniquely sabotages our decision-making.
Consider Frida from our source material. She was a perfectionist who analyzed job offers so intensely, just trying to avoid uncertainty, that she succumbed to total decision paralysis and almost missed out entirely. Her story perfectly maps out this trap. First, you weigh endless pros and cons. Then, the fear of making the wrong choice and suffering regret becomes so overwhelming that you hit total decision paralysis. And the final step? You procrastinate and choose nothing. But here's the kicker. Making no decision is a decision. It's just a decision to let life happen to you rather than taking the reins yourself.
But overthinking is absolutely not one size fits all.
Research from the International Journal of Social Impact shows that your core personality heavily dictates the specific way you obsess. We all fall into this trap, sure, but the shape of the trap looks totally different depending on who you are.
Breaking this down is super revealing. If you're highly conscientious, you might be trapped in these perfection-driven loops, constantly reevaluating your work. Your fix? Flexible goal setting. Now, if you skew towards extroversion, your overthinking might be super outward, excessively vocalizing your concerns to everyone around you, just seeking reassurance. For you, assertiveness training helps you trust your own gut. And if you have high openness, you might get totally lost in deep, reflective, abstract rumination. Channeling that into creative expression is your way out. Identifying your trait is really the key to applying the right coping strategy.
Okay, Section 4, Strategies for a Calmer Mind. Let's stop admiring the problem and start unpacking our clinical toolkit to actually fix it. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, offers a rigid framework to force your brain out of passive, circular worry and into active, linear problem solving. This 5-step method is so powerful because it demands executive functioning. When you actually sit down, define the problem clearly, brainstorm solutions, evaluate them, make a choice, and take action, you are literally pulling energy away from the panic centers of your brain and forcing it into the logical, task-oriented centers.
But when using those CBT steps, you absolutely have to pair them with this critical mantra: done is better than perfect. Because delaying a choice is often just a toxic attempt at risk avoidance. Think about it. Confident people aren't necessarily right more often than the rest of us. They're just far more willing to make imperfect choices and trust that they're resilient enough to handle whatever happens next. You have to accept the messiness of forward progress. Then there's acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. They suggest we stop fighting the thoughts and instead use cognitive diffusion to create distance. It's about acknowledging the anxiety without letting it drive your actions. Imagine your life as a bus that you are driving. Your anxious thoughts are just noisy, obnoxious passengers in the back seat. They're yelling stuff like, "You're going the wrong way," or "This is going to be a disaster." You hear them, you acknowledge they're back there, but you do not let them come up and grab the steering wheel. You just keep driving.
You can also essentially hack your evolutionary mismatch by shifting long-term existential dread into measurable daily routines. If you're anxious about your long-term health, don't just sit and worry about it. Shift that worry into a daily 20-minute walk. Within an hour, you've measured a small win. In a day, you're building a habit. In a week, you've given your primitive brain the immediate, tangible return it is begging for, which drastically lowers your baseline anxiety.
And finally, Section 5, Embracing Imperfect Decisions. We've reached the ultimate goal, reclaiming your power to act.
I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. What is your overthinking trying to protect you from? And does that threat even still exist? Your overthinking is really just an outdated defense mechanism trying to keep you safe. Most of the time, the danger your brain is aggressively scanning for dissolved years ago. You just cannot think your way into absolute certainty. So acknowledge the noise, accept the risk, and take the next step anyway. Stepping forward and making an imperfect choice is truly the only way to live.